Okay, folks, get there. Hey, I promised Kira would be watching a movie on Thursday. So, movie day is Thursday. And today we're going to finish up with the media research stuff. And if you will indulge me, play a Kahoot so we can look at the questions for that. And while we all have some attention left, the final exam review material is up. So that's in the last module in the class. And I have updated the Kahoot challenges so that you can play them as a study activity. And as you know, as always, the exam questions pretty much track with the Kahoot questions. There's just going to be less of those on the exam. So there are 50 questions nonetheless. We were leaving out chapter 12, which was about movie history, because we spent our week, I think, much more profitably talking about industry news. So there's no questions on chapter 12. Otherwise, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 13, there's questions there. And at the bottom here, there's like a list of the topics that we basically, the ones freshest in our minds because we've just been talking about it, right? The magic bullet theory, mean world, which is, we spent a long time watching that video. That was George Gerbner's theory of that media violence is, we haven't demonstrated a one-to-one causal effect between watching violent media and behaving violently. But what we have demonstrated is a one-to-one effect with the people who watch more electronic media are more scared about having violence done to them, which is what he called the mean world theory. Otherwise, also known as cultivation theory, because it cultivates a sense of, reality. It's basically, it contributes to your sense of what's really going on in the world, We talk about Bobo doll, right, which is the modeling. You see, you do, but it tends to only work with like little kids and people who are not thinking too much about what they're actually doing. Gatekeeping, we'll come back to it in a slide today, and then the last few ideas there. So that, for instance, is what's on the exam from our most recent chapter. Yeah, Chris.
It says at the top that the exam's on Thursday, May 21st.
Okay, and that is a Tuesday, right?
It's a Tuesday.
Right, so let's check it out. I'm pretty positive it is Tuesday 5/21. I shouldn't call it Thursday, so let's just see. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, no worries.
So let's just see here. Because they changed around the exam schedule at the, let's see.
Right, yeah, at the beginning of this.
Did you hear about that? I heard about it recently. Let's see, what is it? It is spring 2019. So we go down to the bottom here, and this is what they updated. So our class is Tuesday, Thursday. So we're in this column, and we meet up starting after 10. So it's Tuesday, May 21st,
yeah, okay.
10:30 to 12:30. Thank you, and let us correct this right here. Will save me from several emails for sure. Save. Okay, so look over the content, start studying if you want. The Kahoots are open until a half hour before the exam on 5/21, but as Chris was, it's not exactly like time to the minute somehow. Tell it to stop at 9:30 and it seems to stop a little early, so just try to get that in there. On next Tuesday, May 14th, we'll spend our class playing Kahoots, so, as we love to do. So one Kahoot today and the rest there. Questions about the exam? Nope. Good. We're hurtling towards completion. The other thing to keep an eye on is that the essay is due on Thursday. But of course, I'll be accepting them up until next Tuesday, the 14th. So, reminder, just research paper 2. We've been through this. I don't want to bore us too much with this, but there are, a number of possible topics that you can take. The essay is worth 20% of your grade, so you really have to do it, which is purposeful, of course. And if you have any questions about a particular prompt at this point, feel free to ask me about it. And no problem accepting an essay up until May 14th without a late penalty. After May 14th, it's going to be impossible to submit this. So please do get it done at the latest over the weekend. And I think several of these topics, there's a ton of stuff that you could say about it, right? And better to get something in, even if it's not perfect in your view. I'm sure it'll be adequate to get you a big number of points and get you through. Right? Okay, so that's it about upcoming stuff, and that will be it. With the exam and the final essay in, you will be done. Wonderful. Send around the little attendance thing.
Oh, that's right.
I'll wait for it to come out.
Yeah.
Streaming.
If you're not into it, it's no rush.
Yeah.
Especially since you haven't seen it. So it's nice.
I've seen
Finish.
my
Just
daughter likes
name on the list. Thank you. I'll carry it over.
have to.
Well, if your daughter watches it, you're going to watch it. So that's what I'm trying to say.
But she hasn't seen she hasn't seen
Sure.
them. I've just shown her the important ones.
CJ.
Like them?
She liked.
All
and
right.
Garden.
Okay. So now,
She thinks it's so.
based on our exam review, let me just see these several topics that are left that we have to look at today from media research.
Sorry, guys.
Exam review. The other topics were uses and graphs, and the process we talked about use and content. Okay, pro-social. Need that, and gatekeeping, and okay. Not too much still to go through. Right. So just to situate ourselves where we left off, we have been looking at media research and how it impacts on regulation, and pretty much here where we talked about the way that the FCC treats content, and I mean the government in general, because the FCC will the FCC sets the federal rules regarding content, as well as we know from previous classes, licensing stations and stuff. So we talked about their restrictions on content regarding, there are no restrictions on violent content from the FCC, but we talked about indecency, and where is the slide, for God's sake? I thought it was just there. There it was. Okay. So the FCC regulating offensive content, setting up a safe harbor as a compromise to respect people's First Amendment rights. The government is not supposed to curtail your speech. However, in the case of broadcasting, it clearly does, but it set aside the time from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. as the time that they have jurisdiction, and they are going to regulate indecent content after 10 p.m. and up until 6 a.m. Their rationale for doing so, that they wanted to protect the kids from content that might hurt them, and also provide, all the audience with a certain guarantee of inoffensive content. So after 10 p.m., they are more lenient. However, there is always a state law against obscene content, and that varies state by state. So the FCC won't be putting people in jail for obscenity, but if your state deems it appropriate, then they do. Offensive song lyrics. Okay, we touched on this as a kind of a way into the issue of what they call moral panics, which is that Congress periodically likes to rile up the base by having a good media scare.
I don't want to be the...
Here's a little highlight reel.
Raping your mother.
Buff coat and beaver or beaver and something else.
I'm going to force you at gunpoint to eat me alive.
Sex with Satan, sex with Satan.
Yes.
In the wake of last December's school shooting, Senator Jay Rockefeller has proposed yet another congressional study on violent video games. Such studies are typically accompanied by hearings where representatives of the world's greatest deliberative body get to lecture and threaten artists and business people in front of national TV cameras that would normally not pay much interest to the Senate Commerce Committee.
Madonna's sex book that I haven't seen, but I read reports of it.
Violent and perverse television shows like Fox's when animals attack.
Mr. Snyder, what does SMF stand for?
It stands for the Sick Motherfucking Friends of Twisted Sister.
Is this also a Christian group?
I don't believe that profanity has anything to do with Christianity.
Blaming pop culture for America's societal ills has been a staple of congressional hearings for decades, where the First Amendment is usually regarded as an archaic nuisance.
And I still hear art is art, and in America, artists are supposed to be free to express themselves.
And every time somebody said, oh, you can't, that's censorship, oh, you can't do that, that's a violation of the First Amendment.
Parental responsibility is considered an impossible task.
The television has truly become our electronic babysitter.
And everything from serial killers.
The son of Sam, who killed 8 people in New York, was allegedly into Black Sabbath's music.
Suicide.
He hung himself while listening to AC/DC's Shoot to Thrill.
Deviant sex.
Panties round your knees with your ass in debris.
Have been blamed on artists whose work seems rather silly and campy with just a few years of hindsight.
I think somebody should sponsor a sleaze awards where people show up not in black ties but in coveralls, dressed as garbage men.
On occasion, devil's advocates have been invited to testify on free expression's behalf, though they're commonly met with snide insults from lawmakers who bristle at the mere mention of the word censorship.
Often we've heard that a record never killed anyone, or we're casually dismissed as prudes or censors.
As Congress gears up for another round of scaremongering grandstanding, Reason TV presents Sex, Violence, and Satan, 6 unbelievably dumb congressional hearings. In 2001, the House Committee on Energy and Commerce's hearing on children and media violence.
There are parents in America who think some of this music is killing their children softly.
Raping your mother. Killing your mother.
Get me the machete from OJ and I'm going to make everyone's throats ache.
It was horrifying.
I hope it does not take another Columbine or another 13-year-old shooting a teacher or another 8-year-old shooting a classmate.
I'm watching Popeye with my young son. Bluto punches out all the windows in a rage. And then my young son ran out to the glass storm window and punched his way through it.
In 1997,
Bobo doll
Joe
experiment.
Lieberman and the Senate Committee on Governmental Affairs spent a lot of time talking about Marilyn Manson.
Some of the worst thoughts.
Shoot here and the world gets smaller. Shoot, 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 motherfucker. I'd say that the lyrics to this song contributed directly to my son's death. And I failed to recognize that my son was holding a hand grenade and it was live and that it was going to go off in his mind.
I understand how you feel, but don't be too hard on yourself. Almost every parent in America in that position would have done exactly what you did because it didn't look like a hand grenade. It looked like a CD. Unfortunately, it was a hand grenade.
I know you don't agree with this, but when you look at a painting, what makes one painting good and one painting bad? It's a matter of taste.
I don't hear in your testimony any real acknowledgement about how terrible this music is. When you hear the testimony of Mr. Kuntz, doesn't it make you want to go back? Marilyn Manson, Tupac Shakur, Cannibal Corpse, Snoop Doggy Dogg. To me, this music is the equivalent of yelling fire in a crowded theater where there's no fire.
Also in 1997, the Senate Commerce Committee held hearings on the ineffectiveness of the TV rating system they themselves had imposed on the industry.
There's sometimes that I wish that I could wave a wand or pass a law that would get this junk off of television.
It may be that you have to just have a précis of each show written, printed in the papers and in the digest, and people can actually read what's in the show.
Jingle bitch screwed me over. Go to hell, jingle whore. Go to hell, go to hell, go to hell.
I need everyone to know what a lying bitch Donna is.
I remember coming home one night when one of my boys had been sitting with a babysitter watching a television program. It scared him
because of the violence that came across that TV screen. And he couldn't sleep that entire night.
Don't remain in denial. Don't force us to legislate again in this area.
Most of the programs are falling in the PG category is because many of them are very bland. 4 years ago, the Congress indicated to the networks that they wanted the primetime schedule with less violence in it, and I think the networks have responded.
Of course, bottom line, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, I have such high regard for you.
In 1993, Joe Lieberman and the Senate Committee on Governmental Affairs took on the scourge of ultra-realistic 16-bit video games and plastic toys.
I know that one place parents want us to draw the line is with violence in video games. Mortal Kombat.
Street Fighter II on the Super Nintendo was their #1 game last year. It's called the Super Scope. The gun that you have in your hand is called the Justifier.
To me, that looks like an assault weapon of some kind.
Also in 1993, Attorney General Janet Reno responded to fan mail.
I received these letters from 75 children attending Park Elementary School. Dear Ms. Reno, I don't like violence on TV. It makes me feel rotten.
Now, I know Murder, she wrote, that's not gratuitous violence. I mean, in murder itself, somebody's going to be shown a dead body, and that's acceptable. And tell me whether you think this is gratuitous.
And listen, buddy.
Nobody died, except the credibility of the panel.
It's going to be important to the maintenance of constitutional freedoms in our country. Unless people self-regulate, is going to lead to genuine threats to our freedom.
Buff Coat and Beaver and something else they had. I haven't seen it. I don't watch it, but whatever it was at 7 o'clock. Buff Coat, and they put it on now at 10:30, I think. They've pleaded guilty, and they'll do it as long as you and I have hearings, but we just can't have hearings like we've had now for 40 years.
And going all the way back to 1985, when Senator Al Gore's wife Tipper, along with Treasury Secretary James Baker's wife Susan, founded the Parents Music Research Council and used their husbands' bully pulpits to hold hearings on the dangers of quote-unquote porn rock.
Much has changed since Elvis' seemingly innocent time.
Rock lyrics have turned from "I can't get no satisfaction" to "I'm going to force you at gunpoint to eat me alive."
Young people in our treatment program recovering from drug problems, we ask them to give up heavy metal for at least a year so that they're not again overtaken by feelings of resentment, hate, and the urge to party.
Repeated exposure to song lyrics describing rape, incest,
Drug taking and flirtations with the occult.
I-F-U-C-K like a beast.
is like sandpaper to the soul.
The question we must ask is, should the force be the government?
Clean up your act, or we will do it for you. In the words of the heavy metal band Twisted Sister, we're not going to take it anymore.
Bang your head against the stage like you never have before. Make it ring, make it bleed, make it really sore.
Burn the building. Burn, burn, burn.
He will possess you, he will molest you. Sex with Satan, sex with Satan.
It's my life, and I love sex.
Princess, Darling Nikki, about masturbation.
I met a girl named Nikki. I guess you could say she was a sex fiend. I met her in a hotel lobby masturbating with magazines. Ain't a cardinal sin, baby, let me in. Girl, I'm gonna treat you right. Well, goodness sakes, my snake's alive and it's ready to bite. Listen, you little slut, do as you are told. Come with daddy for me to pour the gold. Golden showers, all through my excrements you shall roam. Bend up and smell my anal vapor. Your face is my toilet paper. On your face I leave a shit tower. Golden showers. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my remarks, and I thank you.
Mr. Chairman. I'm fired.
The complete list of PMRC demands reads like an instruction manual for some sinister kind of toilet training program whipped up like an instant pudding by the wives of Big Brother. People who write bad laws are, in my opinion, more dangerous than songwriters who celebrate sexuality. Some of the albums that have been selected for abuse here are obscure. I think that a lot of deep digging was done in order to come up with the song about the anal vapors.
Do you make a profit from sales of rock records?
Yes.
Thank you. I think that statement tells the story to this committee.
The beauty of literature, poetry, and music
is that they leave room for the audience to put its own imagination, experiences, and dreams into the words. There is no authority who has the right or the necessary insight to make these judgments.
Today's young people viewing musicians that, to all outward appearances, would offend their parents are intelligent and sophisticated enough to play such performers in their proper context and to make their own judgments. And in fact, many of these musicians are viewed as little more than glorified comic book characters. Really, to underestimate the ability of young people today to make these perceptions just begins to expose the problems that anti-regulatory steps would create.
I'd be interested to see what toys your kids ever had,
Why would you be interested?
just as a point of interest in this.
Well, come on over to the house. I'll show them to you.
That was the hearing where they brought up. Oh, really? And Al Gore was like, just want to say I'm a big fan of your music. And then John Denver was like, cool, but I disagree. Basically, it was like, you guys are all wrong.
What were you saying, Chris? Is that
That was the
more about
hearing.
the pop music one?
Yeah, like they expected Dee Snider to sound like an idiot, and he was like, he wrote a really eloquent speech. Frank Zappa like basically shut down every one of their points, and then the Senate committee brought out John Denver on their own behalf, and then he wrote a speech totally blasting them for their censorship.
They were hoping that he would be a more
Because they
conservative
considered
opinion
him,
on it all.
Decent and
Right,
moral
Rocky
music.
Mountain High
Yeah,
had
exactly.
nothing to do with anything you could smoke. It was all about altitude and air. Okay, cool. Oh,
It was a lot to take in.
Any reaction? Oh, this? Yeah. I mean, but it can be reduced to a pretty consistent kind of approach, right? That content is one kind or another is dangerous.
I have two things to say. Oh, do you want to say?
No, go ahead.
I have two things to say. Like, number one, I noticed the average age of the people up there. That says a lot. Number two, how hypocritical they are. The one lady said, "Oh, the innocent days of Elvis." When Elvis came out, he was the devil, shaking his hips on TV,
gyrating.
and their parents were saying, "Why are you listening to this devil music?" Blah 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 blah. And now they're doing the same thing with their kids and the younger generation.
Right.
It's like WTF.
And they're smart enough to know the historical kind of progression that Elvis is now innocent and this stuff, and now we're looking at it going, look at those video games, how ridiculous.
Right.
It's like so pixelated, no one could ever be inspired by that.
I mean, have they seen a Looney Tunes cartoon?
Right, that's true.
Dropping anvils, pianos,
racist.
yeah, violent and racist. Yeah.
Very good.
So stupid.
Yeah. And when's the next one coming to us? It's probably pretty well. We got enough circuses about other stuff.
When it was like that one senator's example, he's like, I watched Popeye with my son, and then Bluto broke all the windows, so then my son went out and broke a window.
Right.
It's like, well, you should have told him, yeah, why didn't you stop him, and why didn't you tell him that you can't do that? Behave yourself.
But imagine if that guy gets hold of the Bobo doll experiment. We have proof from Stanford psychologists, that this is actually what happens. Yeah. So it's a good point about how ridiculous politics is, but also how, research can be bent and twisted to political means, even if research is conducted by non-political, social psychologists or something. You can easily see it getting caught up in this type of thing. Any other reactions?
No, I would just ask them how their parents reacted to what they liked when they were younger, because that would usually shut them up.
I don't think anything would shut them up, frankly. They're there trying to appeal to their super conservative, base, and I don't think that's changed. That what they want is a simple message that people who don't even pay any attention to it can just, it'll confirm their opinions already.
They also want something on their congressional record.
Right.
Like a victory.
I spearheaded the latest, Inquisition.
I think I was gonna say I think it's interesting how they focused a lot on like Satan and like Satanism in the rock and the metal, and didn't focus too much on. I feel like in recent years there's a lot of these conversations around hip hop, but then they've kind of gotten really quiet because although there's still a lot of violence in hip hop lyrics, it's more about drug addiction or drug abuse for that matter.
Or money. Or money.
Definitely.
Life on the street.
Definitely. And I think one thing is that they talk about sex, but they don't talk about objectification of women and misogyny. And I think that would be something that could have helped their case. They could have said, "Oh, these people are all misogynists from Prince to Kiss. Like, they're all literally just talking about these women as sex objects, but they didn't even bring that up. So it's like, do y'all even care? Because think about the message that sends to young women.
Well, they did bring
Or
it
young
up.
men.
They brought it up, and if you watch, you can watch the whole.
I mean,
hearing.
yeah, I'm just talking about like
in that clip.
I think the reason is hilarious for doing this.
Yeah.
The libertarian, like, media outlet. I think that's funny in and of itself. But as you were saying.
Oh no, I just 100% agree with you. In the PMRC hearing, though, they tried to argue that, like, I guess it took place in the late '80s, and there was like the whole like heavy metal is Satan worship scare going on, and then hip hop was like had just turned the corner into like gangster rap was just starting to become popular. So like it was in the hearing, but not like as prevalent as like the metal and stuff. Yeah, but the whole thing was a joke. I mean.
They should have shown like some videos or more images instead of just reading random lyrics out of nowhere. It's like reading lyrics out of context. It's like, but what were the lyrics that came up like the line before or 2 lines before? Because like
everything out of context.
Good point. Yeah,
because that's poetry. It's like if you're reading the whole thing, you're gonna find more.
There's a bigger picture.
You're gonna find the context. But if you were to just show like a music video or like a poster, it's like, oh, there. That's not good. Like, if that's what kids are putting up in their bedrooms, that's not good. We don't want that.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, like, kids watch crazy videos on YouTube that have no connection to music. So it's like...
Oh, yeah.
Totally.
Stuff like that.
So as a creator, like, do you think about what goes into your song lyrics and like
all the time? Because I want to say things that are going to reflect me the way I want to, the way I want to appear to other people. So it's like I might be more intentional. I might be intentional. I am very intentional about the words I use or the images that I try to put out there. But I don't think that it needs to be read super literally.
Like he said, it's left up to the fans to interpret what the artist to put what they want to.
Yeah, and if you not, because you might not even be listening to what I'm saying. You might be listening to the beat.
Yeah,
you might be just tuning everything out. You just want to dance, so you go and dance to whatever music I put in front of your ears. So it's like it doesn't even really matter at the end of the day. It's like if I decide to take a photo of a car, I can decide to take a photo of a car in a way that accentuates the whole car. Or I can just take a picture of the license plate in the back of the car. So it's like. You're at the mercy of me where I get to decide what I want you to see or what I want you to hear, but it's up to you to do what you want with that information. If you want to run the plates, that's on you. But if you want to like look at the car and you want to turn your car into something that looks like that car, that's up to you too.
Right.
So it's like, I think interpretation is such a big part of it, but it's like at the end of the day, it's more so me just trying to get ideas out of my head rather than me caring about what somebody's gonna think. Because, like, people are going to be upset about something one way or the other.
No matter what you do.
And like, the only person I'm really trying to make happy is myself. Unless I wrote a song or I wrote something or, like, did it with the intention of giving it to somebody else as a gift. That's an entirely different scenario, but it's for that person.
But you wouldn't feel a pressure, like, inside yourself saying, oh, maybe I shouldn't say that or something like that.
It's funny, actually. There was I was recording maybe like a year ago, and I had this one lyric about gassing people like Hitler. And it's like, out of context, it sounds really bad. If you were to just listen to that, you might be like not paying attention to the entire verse. All of a sudden you hear that, you're like the dude who was recording me, he was like, we should censor that. I said, hell no, you're not censoring my words. Because if you listen to what I said leading up to it, it's like I'm not being anti-Semitic at all. I'm not even talking about Jewish people. I'm not talking about anybody that was killed in the Holocaust, because it's more than just Jewish people. I'm not talking about any of that. All I said is that when I'm spitting rhymes, I'm gassing people like Hitler gassed people. So listen to that. Listen to that part of the lyric and understand why I even said it in the first place. Yes, it got your attention. That was the whole point of it was to get your attention, but I'm not going to censor it. And I mean, like, sometimes people say nigga or bitch way too much in the song to the point where it's like, you're not even saying anything. You're just saying the same words over and over and over again. But like, if you listen to how they're saying it with the music, then it's like, okay, I understand that there's
these are not said in hate. These are said.
Yeah, you're kind of just throwing words around at the end of the day. It's like, I feel like you can really tell when you hear somebody say something what the intention of it is. If somebody is screaming bitch like really angrily, then you're like, okay, that you probably mean that to like throw it in somebody's face. So it's like, once again, it's interpretation. I get that kids might not have the best interpretation of things because their worldview isn't as well formed.
Yeah.
As like
Well, that's the logic that they take. Yeah.
But the thing is that like we heavily censor everything to the point we heavily censor everything, but everybody can get the uncensored version real easy. So it's like, what's the point?
Sounds like you're well prepared for the next congressional hearing, too. You got your arguments.
Conversations that I have to have these conversations with people because, as I said, I had to have this conversation with the dude who was recording my.
I think it's great. You guys have those conversations.
He was moved like
excellent.
He was like, we shouldn't put this out. I said, but I really and like never released the song for one reason or another. But like. I even went back and I like took out the censor, like his censorship.
But you thought about it, and you know,
I thought about
your position.
And I said,
you got to.
I might rewrite the verse so that like it leads into that a little better. But the whole point is that I'm trying to catch your attention.
Yeah. Last words, anybody?
That's really interesting, man.
I think there was one guy again in the PMRC hearing that I think he was like the head of a radio station.
Oh yeah.
And he was trying to argue, like, well, you're underestimating
the audience,
the intelligence of the kids that are listening to this stuff. First of all,
for sure.
I think it's important.
Yeah. Again, before I had kids, I really thought that the whole kid thing was an alibi as well, and then I realized no, they do kind of eat stuff up. Again, good parenting was obviously going to tell them what's right, what's wrong, and how to act and how not to act, but. There's a lot of, just cognitive influence, if you want. But that doesn't mean you have to censor stuff. And I guess the other thing that, comes across in the video and watching Lieberman sort of saying, you guys got to regulate yourselves, otherwise we're going to do it and it's going to be so much worse. And that is the way they have, handled this as much as possible, because they'd rather not create laws that they then have to enforce, and the laws are always kind of like, again, it's so much a question of interpretation. So you create a law and the judge has to interpret it, and then you're doing all kinds of things to creativity that they don't necessarily want to do.
And then unexpected consequences from
right. And of course it's going to be that way because you create a law without an idea of what every situation is going to be. So you can even hear Lieberman, who seems to probably make a lot of political capital off of this whole venture, judging by the fact that he's there over and over again. But he's saying, you guys got to regulate yourselves and stuff. So when they talk about the TV rating system, they don't mean what we were talking about, Arbitron and stuff. They talk about putting a PG marker in front of a show or something like that. So, and that would be self-regulation on the part of the industry. And that's what they tried to do with Hollywood as well, with the age rating system and stuff. And it went way back to I'm sorry we skipped the chapter, but a very unsuccessful government initiative called the Hays Code, where they actually did set up a czar who censored scripts and stuff, and I think they regretted that forevermore afterwards because it was very arbitrary and non-productive, and you could imagine that the industry turned it into a way of threatening people they wanted to threaten, and then eventually it turned into 1950s McCarthy hearings, right, where people were accused of being communists and stuff like that, put out of work. The whole thing was, I think, something that politicians think about and try to avoid nowadays, but they still do like to grandstand. Anyhow, that was real interesting just to hear from the creative side on it as well, like what folks are thinking about in this situation. Oh gosh, so we covered this a little bit of the various different types of research that gets done. I'm trying to design, one of my tasks this summer is in my media literacy class. I have to, kind of teach at least one of these methods because it satisfies a requirement in the college, so you get your dose of science in it. So I'm dealing with content analysis, which is where people actually count up all the incidents of stereotyping, or so in the cultivation analysis, there was some discussion of that. And thank you, Rick, for sending me a link about cops and stuff.
Oh yeah, that was
yeah. And as I mentioned, it's a podcast, which is it's a piece of entertainment, which looks at the social influence of cops and how it has influenced our impressions of policing. But what I found really interesting in it was that they had actually, the producers of the show and 6 other people had watched every episode of Cops and done a systematic content analysis in precisely the way that, you know, we would teach one to do it as social science research. And it was a very useful tool for them to come back to the producers of the show and say, oh no, you know, we try to give balance and stuff. And they come back and say, well, no, actually, you know, black people are 15% of the population, but they're arrested 30% of the time on your show. You know, why is that? And they had counted every single incident, you know, so they could actually objectively say, you guys are misrepresenting and such. So I found that interesting. And thank you, Rick, for sharing the latest reviews and stuff.
Yeah, well, you were talking about it and it came out the same day. I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
Fox had put out something about the whole Cops show.
Yeah.
And they mentioned the podcast that he was talking about.
Yeah, I read that.
Yeah, and it is interesting the way the media kind of jumps onto certain topics and then just, you know, everyone's talking about it all of a sudden for 5 minutes.
Maybe they were watching our cast and saw you talking about
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
That's a good idea, yeah.
But I'm advancing the corporate media agenda.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, watch out. But in a critical way. Okay, so violence studies, these are basically all based on content analysis. I don't think there's a lot of surprise there in terms of, you know, the growth of violent acts. And again, the FCC is much more interested in policing sexuality, obscenity, profanity than they're interested in policing, you know, violent events on TV. It's pretty wild. So again, this is just data from the different studies that have been done on television content. So, you know, whether it's who gets arrested on Cops or how many curse words or how many killings you'll see on TV. And a good criticism of this is that it becomes, you know, devoid of context, as Julian's talking about. You know, when you're just counting up the number of times somebody is killed, it really, you know, doesn't pay much attention to, you know, was it like, you know, like what was the nature of the story that was surrounding it. So there's, you know, definitely strengths and weaknesses to this type of content approach where all you do is count up the events. You know, it leads to like big numbers. What do you do with them after that is a political issue. You know? All right, so work on video games has, you know, a lot of it is being influenced by concern about violent acts within video games as well. So here it just tries to also suss out a little bit of the, you know, counterpoint to that idea that all that's happening is, you know, kids getting excited and kids watching violent or participating in, you know, virtual violence and stuff. However, they, you know, other aspects that have been identified which are more positive. So this is what they call pro-social. So, you know, which is the opposite of anti-social. So easy enough to remember if it's, you know, anti versus pro, right? And so again, the kind of political consensus about video games, which is that they're, you know, a waste of time at best, or at worst they incite violence and stuff. So some of the research is done just looking at, well, what are the positive outcomes? You know, emphatic communication. Pardon me?
Sorry, hand-eye coordination.
Hand-eye coordination. Okay, is that on the list or is that one of your own? Okay.
No, that's actually a benefit.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I won't get into it.
Later on, you know, precision mousing. You know, if you go into graphics or something.
The Army actually is using that as one of their recruiting, because that's how you do the drones. They have the.
Oh, interesting. Oh, wow, that's amazing.
That's how they handle the drones. They
okay.
People who have good high-end coordination because of video games.
Oh, okay. Another use, maybe a little more controversial or something. Well, maybe not. Is just to give people immersive. Put people suffering from PTSD into immersive battle experiences in video games and to try to help them like kind of relive it with a safer outcome, basically. You know, so like basically if you're suffering from some recollection or, you know, even deeper than conscious recollection of some horrible battle experience, to put you back under that kind of stress and to give you a sense afterwards, yeah, okay, I've relived it, but I've survived it. I'm safe. I'm away from it, you know. And so that they've been using that. It's a pretty interesting idea of immersive, you know, kind of. It's all coming out of games, of course, but it's a different use of it, you know. Julian?
What about when people are like talking through their headsets, like on Xbox Live or over the PSN? Because I know like, because I feel like it comes down to, it goes back to like collective identity,
Yeah.
and like community forming, I guess.
Yeah, and the thing lower down, you may not be familiar with this concept of phatic communication, but that's just the well-being that you get from just hanging out, and it's, you know, hey, how are you doing? It's like, it's basically making the point that although adults or, you know, older people who are not involved in the practice tend to think, well, you're so isolated. You're sitting there all day, 12 hours a day. You don't talk to anybody. But this is just pointing out that, you know, if you're in a multiplayer game and talking to people all the time, you know, you're getting the same social benefits about seeing your friends. You're just, you know, talking to them on a headset.
I just always think about like Xbox Live in like the early 2000s, where it was just like hella profane.
Okay.
It's just like the communication was just hella profane.
Right. You know, I mean, I know what my kid says with his friends at school. I don't know. I think it's probably pretty similar. I don't know.
I feel like it's almost worse though, because there's the anonymity of like being online and not actually being face to face.
I think that's a great point. What does everyone else think? Like, anonymity seems to me to be a problem here.
Absolutely. A lot of people are tougher behind a wall, you know?
Yeah, more insensitive, right? Because you don't have to face that person the next day and see how you messed them up.
Yeah.
Rick, any ideas?
I always have a lot of ideas. I agree with the whole, you know, being anonymous, but nowadays, even when they're not anonymous, like kids in school now, they get bullied at school and then go home and get bullied online on Facebook from people they know in school. Like, so it doesn't stop when you go home.
Exactly.
It's 24/7 they're being harassed. So they know who's harassing them, and like, I mean, being anonymous or not, just being behind that wall, I guess, makes them feel more confident in bullying someone.
Yeah.
CJ, what do you think?
Well, I mean, like, I don't know, like, the social game, or like, as far as like communicating with each other, like, in online gaming, my friends and I kind of stop, or we just have our own parties and just like talk amongst each other.
Okay, so you actually,
mute the game.
you're gonna play the, oh, okay.
Yeah, because we, I don't know, like, there'll just be some kid like talking smack, just like,
right, and that's a real pain.
I'm trying to get into this right now.
Some 11-year-old.
Yeah, it's like,
No, my kids all have that all the time too. It's like, oh no, some freak is in here, you know. So then they get like a private server or something and just play with their friends or something, you know.
Yeah, just like host our own party or chat party.
Trolls everywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like, what a bummer. It seems like, yeah.
Or they have music playing in the background through like a speaker.
Okay.
And, like everybody can hear the music.
You have to hear all that damn stuff instead of like what you want to talk about.
I'm not trying to hear.
Okay, so I'm sensing pluses and minuses here too, even if, you know, again, I think this was pretty clearly constructed to say, well, what's positive about what's going on? Again, what's pro-social about what happens in that type of environment? But then
They have a lot of games now that teach kids.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, especially the younger kids.
Oh my God, I don't know how
Or
many.
like,
At least $100 a month of subscription fees goes out of my household to like Brainiac games like that.
Yeah.
You know? Oh yeah, it's for the kid, $9 a month. Of course, he'll be a mathematical genius. You know, crazy. All right. Well, anyway, so there is some attempt to make video games a little bit less of a satanic demon. What else have we got here? This is more like a listing of the different media effects that finally. You know, the people have been following up and trying to, you know, investigate and stuff. I mean, the one that stands out to me here is the notion of catharsis, which was also debunked. So they basically tried to do some controlled video game experiments where they wanted to see if, you know, they'd test you in advance and see if you were, you know, feeling anxious, aggressive, or God knows what, with the idea that, you know, try to prove or disprove the notion that by engaging in this fantasy activity, you know, you somehow would blow off steam or achieve some kind of catharsis where you could get over emotion, you know. And so in terms of violence, that was not proven. You know, people tested afterwards, you know, not as more cool and relaxed after having spent hours, you know, exercising their aggression in a virtual platform. But again, as we were saying, the Army is using this to try to help provide some kind of, you know, therapy to people who have PTSD and, you know, live traumatic experiences and stuff. So you could argue as a form of catharsis too. So it's you know, ongoing attempts to investigate this stuff without enormous success or you know, conclusive failure. So they heads up, exam question coming up, cognitive effects. So they've tried to divide the different types of effects that gaming could have on people. Affective, you know, means your emotions. Does it stir you up? Does it make you happy or sad? And cognitive effects is more like, does it give particular information to you? You know, so you could thereby classify games into, you know, the game gets you really excited because there's a lot of shooting and action in it. It's more of a kind of an affective effect. If you know, it's a teaching game like we were just talking about, then you're looking for a cognitive effect. What have you learned, right? And then in terms of cognitive effects, so again, providing information, noted they bring back Gerbner's cultivation theory. Remember, that's the mean world syndrome. So obviously, you know, there the information provided is perhaps misleading, that the world is a violent and dangerous place, but it is of an informational level. It's a cognitive effect. It makes you believe or understand something, versus an affective effect. It makes you feel something. You know, so that's it. So there's a question about Gerbner.
Pop in real quick. Carrie said to check the chat.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. Thanks. She's got a point. If we were playing Cahoots today, can you read all the questions and answers out, including the colors? Oh my God. Wow, okay. We better get on to Cahoots pretty soon then, because that's going to be a lot of talking. Okay. We'll try, Kira. Right. Let me just see. Where were we? Oh, we were finishing up on this. I think we got like one of those. Yeah, right. It's going to be even longer. One more thing here, multitasking. Okay, multitasking, disproved. People think they can multitask effectively, and they did test it. Turns out cognitive performance goes down. You know, whether it's still a decent trade-off to do two things at once and just do them worse, but nonetheless, there's conclusive proof that you can't do two things at once as effectively. But you know, reduced performance might be acceptable, except when it comes to driving and things like that. So, oh my God, agenda setting. So we talked about gatekeeping. I'm just going for what's the questions on the Kahoot or the test. So remember, gatekeeping refers to the ability of old media to set the agenda for what people talk about in society. A great example, you know, a podcast on cops comes out, and then all of a sudden, people are talking about cops. You know. And that's, you know, in this day and age with a very diversified media system, it still operates. You know, the media's attention is pulled, you know, by Donald Trump mostly now. The guy is a wizard. Basically, it's like every third article about anything has Trump in it because he's, you know, put some charlatan in charge of, you know, the environmental agency or something. So when you talk about nature, his name is often in it. It's ridiculous. But let's get back onto topic. You know, so just the ability of the media to direct our attention to certain things, and of course keep our attention away from other things, right? So the idea here, the media don't tell us what to think, but they do tell us what to think about. So that's not brainwashing, but setting the topic of the day. And finally, this whole research topic, I guess, or what, I mean, you know, the people have been looking for decades at media effects, like we were talking about, strong effects, limited effects, and moderate effects as they roll back their ambitions. There's been a whole other bunch of people who have said, well, let's not look for what the media does to people, but what people do with the media. And so these guys come up with literally hundreds of different categories of media use and say, yeah, audiences use media for different reasons, in different ways, to pass the time, to make themselves feel better, to inform themselves, and so on. You know, people have a content and a purpose in mind. And this is a very different model of the audience than of the passive spectator who's waiting for the magic bullet to come and change their mind or something, or of the person who's going to be duped and manipulated. This one says, we're smart. We use this stuff. What?
I think kids are even getting smarter than us when it comes to
so, you know, I won't even ask you guys.
That's his spread.
Because it conforms much more to our own self-conception of what we do with the media. We turn something on because we want it, right? And so this is appealing to most normal people who view ourselves as in charge of our media experience and what we do in media. Whereas a lot of the research has rather looked at us as passive or as something that absorbs effects and produces behaviors beyond our ability to really control it. And I think both are relevant. We do become addicted to certain experiences. That's out of our control. Put a cell phone in our hand. We are not in control of where this is going. Like
where it's going.
No, I'm serious. You know what I mean? It's like, yes, we can put this aside, but more and more we pay a price for doing that. You know, and we have great benefits, so we use it, but we accept the changes that we introduce into our lives. So, and there's no one in control. No one knows, exactly what this will do. Apple didn't figure it out in advance. That's scary shit. TV viewing, instrumental or ritualistic. So we saw this before, but there is a question on the exam. So you remember, instrumental is when you sit down with a goal in mind, right? So I am going to find out about media ownership because right? Ritualistic is it's after dinner. I have nothing to do. Let's see what's going on the internet, and all of a sudden you're down 50 feet down a rabbit hole or something. So that's binge watching, whatever, right? So there's a ritual in it. You don't know why you're doing it, but it has a comfort in doing it. Right? All right, we talked about obscenity and all the rest. I think we covered everything. Okay, so Kahoot time, folks. And so first up, let's get this up here. Yeah, Kahoot. Mike, I have a whole bunch of printouts for you about that. I'm going to give it to you in class, next class. Chapter 13. So we're going to take this a little slower next to Kira's request. Start up here. 812-234. Does it? Is it really bad today? Damn it.
Anyone? 2, 2, 2, 3. Is it working for you?
Is it working for anybody?
It's saying the pen is-
CJ's in. The pin is not correct?
Yeah.
That's weird.
We didn't recognize that game.
Kira got in. Maybe it was just some kind of lag or something.
I'm just restarting the app.
Okay. We good? Do I hit start? Start. Yeah. Again, it's just non-competitive. Some believe the government should regulate media content. Others believe that viewers should. Wow. It's a pretty general question. So, red is false. Blue is true in this case. I hope I'm providing enough information. 50-50. Roll of the dice. That's why we like true false. So it is true. Right? So when it comes to content, think of this as like, for kids. It's like should we have government rules or should parents be involved? So.
I thought it was the artist. I thought that was the argument.
That the artist should.
The artist should be in charge of regulating their own work. Like, that's what they were saying.
No, not in this case, not in this question. But
I think we know who the
it's an equally interesting. As we saw, there's the precedent of letting the industries kind of regulate themselves. Some content not intended for children may be broadcast without penalty during the safe harbor time. So red is false, and blue is true. We did talk about safe harbor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is true. So remember, safe harbor is between 10 p.m. till 6 a.m., right? You can put up material which uses those 7 words and could be considered offensive. All right, next one. Let's just see. Kira, is it going okay if we were playing?
That's what we should watch for the thing that you wanted to watch. Was the George Carlin. 7.
Oh, the 7. Yeah, it's really funny. He's
Genius.
Maybe that could be a trailer before we get to the main event.
Yeah.
Pro-social media effects have positive results, like kids getting higher academic achievement.
Wow.
Okay, so 4 got a true. So yeah, sorry, with red, false, blue, true. So it is true.
I can't get it.
There is a.
I did too.
There is a question, right, in the prompts for the media research essay also about pro-social programming.
Yeah.
Just means that it is positive effect on kids, their outlook. Obscenity restrictions in broadcasting are rooted in the Miller v. California court decision. False is red, true is blue.
Just all true false.
True.
A lot of these are true false, yeah. Because I think the multiple choice questions sucked. Okay, 5, good job. So yes, it is true. That was the, that was the decisive case here in California. Okay, next up. Which of these is most closely related to Albert Bandura's Bobo doll experiments? So red, uses and gratifications. Yellow, powerful effects. Blue, offensive lyrics. Or green, modeling behavior.
Which one were you looking for?
You got to choose which one best describes.
Yeah, blue.
Good job. Green was in fact modeling behavior. Okay, so the Bobo doll. Remember, that's where the kid punches out the rubber doll after having seen it on TV. So that's a way of modeling behavior. Which of these is most closely related to the belief that media have limited effects? So remember, we talked about strong, limited, and then finally it was, what was it? Yeah, with an M. Oh my God. Moderate, I think. Okay, anyway. So which of these is limited? Okay, that was a toughie. All right, but the right one is the 2-step flow. So let's just review quickly here. The strong effect would be like the magic bullet, right?
Yeah.
And that's because it just goes bang right in your head. There's no way you can deny it. It doesn't matter who. If they get exposed to the media message, they do the behavior. Obviously, it's not true, but what we're talking about is, the type of research hypotheses that were employed. So the next one, the limited effect, was 2-step flow is an example. And the other example is selective cognition, right? Where you could, depending on your prior beliefs as an audience, you would be more likely to seek out, understand, and retain information that is already what you believe. So there, the Fox News viewer would be looking, for confirmation of conservative viewpoints already. So that would be selective cognition. And then the two-step flow was, remember, it was the theory that if the media message goes from the source to an influential opinion leader and then out to the rest of the population, it is at its most powerful. And so this is a limited effect because it's limited by the intervention of an opinion leader. Whereas the strong effect is like from the antenna into your head and you get the idea. So the two-step flow is a limited effect. So, the Great American Values Test is probably a great idea for a Netflix reality show. Okay, cultivation is an example of what type of media effect? Red, affective effect, which is a tongue twister. Yellow, a cognitive effect. Blue, a behavioral effect. Or green, a quantitative effect.
Yellow, blue, green.
Right. All these and more can be yours if the color is right.
Come on down.
That's right. Come on down. So it was a
Dishwasher behind
cognitive effect of dishwashers. The magic door that leads to an entire bedroom suite. All right. So it's the cognitive effect. That was
I love that.
1960s. Cognitive effect. Okay. So remember what we were talking about. Cultivation is the mean world syndrome. That's where, if you watch a lot of TV, you're much more likely to think that the world is a violent and dangerous place. And so in this case, it's a cognitive effect. It creates the idea in your mind that the world is dangerous. Right? An affective or an emotional effect would be that you would jump in terror or run out of your seat or something like that. This is more of a mental effect. Which theory says that people who view a lot of television view the world as a mean place? Closely related to our last question, all right? Is it red, the imitation effect, yellow, the catharsis effect, blue, the inhibition effect, or green, the cultivation effect? Okay, so it's cultivation. Remember? So among these moderate effects is cultivation. That is a cognitive effect. And it's also called the mean world.
Did you get 0 points?
You can tell that I think this is one of the best pieces of research. Okay, so green, the answer is cultivation. So it's cultivation analysis plays off the idea that people think the world is a mean place.
Does it mean you watch it in love?
Oh, I'll tell you after, okay? The ability of news media to focus our attention and concerns on certain issues, such as the recent appearance of a podcast about cops. So the certain issues is known as red, spamming, yellow, disinhibition, blue, biasing, or green, agenda setting. What would be your answer?
Blue, green.
I say green.
Biasing, agenda setting.
All right, we got a strong response for the right answer. Agenda setting. Okay, so remember, this is the ability of the media not to tell us what to think, but what we should think about. What should we be talking about? That's agenda, the agenda for our conversation. Which perspective assumes that individuals select media and content with specific purposes in mind? So this is in the very last things that we were talking about. So red, the magic bullet theory. Yellow, the two-step flow. Blue, modeling theory. Or green, uses and gratifications theory. All right, good. Again, a strong tendency towards the right answer. So uses and gratifications, this means audiences have uses for the media. They're gratified by particular uses, so that's why they call it uses and gratifications. It puts the audience in the active position of selecting and using the media for their own purposes, which is not something that all of this research thinks of. tendency to remember messages that have the most meaning for us is most closely associated with so if we test a bunch of people, we show them stuff, and then afterwards we test and see did they remember it or not. Which, yeah, woo, wow, my God, that is conclusive data, selective retention, all right? So because we remember the message, we retain it in our heads, so that is selective retention.
We all passed the final.
I hope so. It's not looking too bad, but certainly if you play this a few more times and get yourselves familiar with this, I'm pretty sure everyone's going to do well. Great. Okay, that's it for today. Thursday is going to be movie day, and then next Tuesday we're going to run all the Kahoots together and just talk as a final review for the exam.
And no class next Thursday.
Yeah, that's for us Tuesday is our last class, and I believe Wednesday next week is the last day of classes for